Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start talking. So please have a seat because it's already 3 past and we have a lot to discuss. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks, everyone, for coming to the social science sessions, even though it's not just a social science session, but a bit of a mix. It's a multidisciplinary session. My name is Catalina. I'm from Massey University. Where's the thing? So, can I get this? Yeah, thank you. So, we cannot start this session without acknowledging the person who brought, it was maybe not the first, but one of the first, who brought social science into engineering, with many others to follow, distinguished Professor David Johnson. Unfortunately, as you heard the previous session by a few that mentioned, he passed away earlier this year. David was a professor of disaster risk management and director of the Joint Center for Disaster Research at Massey University in Wellington, a center he established in 2006. Some of you might be familiar with him. You probably saw his presentation last year when he talked about tsunamis and preparedness here at the conference. He presented many times at this conference and many other conferences that you might have attended. If you chatted with him, you probably noted that he always saw opportunities. He was a mentor to many, always dedicated to supporting early career researchers. I never once knew him to refuse helping anyone and everyone who he will come across in life. As many will agree, David was a generous man. He didn't take, he gave. He brought people together, and he changed many, many lives, including mine. David was a fellow of our society, and his contribution, leadership, and mentorship and dedication to the social science and emergency management and engineering, I have to say, will be missed. We will keep working on bridging disciplines and building a resilient community as David once dreamed of. I just want to thank David, and this was just a few words about him. So now, moving into our session, putting people at the heart of engineering. So this session will explore the complex relationship between engineering, risk perception, and resilience in New Zealand. To get the conversation going, I will introduce briefly our spectacular speakers and their topics, and then they will come over here one by one, and we are going to have a Q&A session. So first, we'll hear from Sonny. Sonny is an emergency Maori researcher in civil engineering. He is undertaking his PhD at Auckland University. He will present a study on Fahrensohn and will cover the importance of culturally informed engagement in seismic assessment, a very important topic. Second, we will hear from Jeff. Jeff leads the Auckland Council Building Inspection Team. He has more than 2 decades of experience in building regulatory roles. He will share today his lessons from disaster response, showing how good seismic design can also mitigate risk from landslide and floods, also a very trending topic. Third, we'll hear from Julia. Julia is an associate professor at the Joint Center for Disaster Research at Massey University. She will explore why people adopt or ignore engineering solutions, highlighting the social and psychological factors at play. Our last but not least speaker will be Charlotte. Charlotte is a joint managing director at Resource. She is a social scientist with an engineering background, and Charlotte often works at the interface between physical and social science. Charlotte will talk about how organizations face a unique risk challenges, stressing the need for targeted engineering communication strategies. So together, this presentation will try to bridge engineering, society, and policy to strengthen community resilience. No pressure, guys. So yeah, that's it from me. Sonny, over to you.
So, putting people at the heart of engineering. Kia ora everybody, my name is Sonny Vercoe and I'm a PhD student at the University of Auckland. So the title of today's presentation is acquiring information for the DSA of Wharenui. My PhD is funded by RNC, transitioning on towards TPK, TALT, the Uni Quake Core, and of course Te Toi Whakaruruhau. So over the next 10 minutes, I'll be sharing my experience within the data collection phase of conducting Wharenui DSAs as a part of the broader goal of my thesis to develop the entire Wharenui DSA. And I guess what I really wanted to share today is a step-by-step process that anyone could follow if that is of interest to you. Okay, so tuatahi ake kia pepehatia tōku whakapapa. So to set the foundation of this presentation, I'd like to share my pepeha, which outlines where I'm from in terms of marae and wharenui. So i te taha tōku māma, ko Paeroa te maunga, ko Waikato te awa, ko te arawa te waka, ko Ngāti Tahu te iwi, ko Wahaki te marae, ko Tahumatua te whare tupuna, ai te taha o tōku pāpa, ko Matawhaura te maunga, ko Roto Iti te roto, ko te arawa no te waka, ko Ngāti Hinekura te apū, ko Paunamunu te marae, ko Haumai Tawhiti te whare tupuna. So before we get into today's topic, I'd first like to explain or describe a marae for those in our audience who may not be aware. So marae are traditional meeting grounds for Māori, the indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a marae is a settlement of buildings generally on ancestral lands, and they are treated as meeting or gathering grounds for iwi, tribes, hapu, sub-tribes, or whānau, families. Marae provide a sense of belonging, which is essential for the identity and well-being of Māori communities and Māori people. And for centuries, physical tribal infrastructure, such as marae, have spontaneously become support centres for Māori in the face of adversity, especially in recent years. So marae are typically characterised by these buildings. So you've got the wharenui, whare meaning house, nui meaning big, so the meeting house. You've got the wharepaku, the ablution blocks, the wharekai, the dining hall, and of course the waharo, the gateway. And also for those in our audience who may not be familiar about wharenui buildings in particular, so wharenui are buildings on a marae that are named after an ancestor, and usually that ancestor is a key ancestor within the iwi, hapu, or whānau. And so wharenui are usually adorned with carvings and serve as a gathering place for ceremonies, discussions, and rituals, while also acting as a bastion of knowledge and history. Wharenui are key to the preservation of our tribal identity, as the activities that occur within these buildings and around them, they're made up of practices and traditions that need to be passed from one generation to the next. And so because a wharenui is named after an ancestor, it is the ancestor that people believe. And so the several structural components, they represent the different body parts. For example, the amo at the front are the legs, the roro, the facade is the brain, the raparapa outside are the fingers, the maihi running up to the apex are the arms, the kōruru at the apex is the face, the poho is the chest, the pautoko manawa, the central column, is referred to as the heart, the heke, the rafters, are referred to as the ribs, and of course the tāhuhu, the ridge beam, is considered the spine. So an ancestor inviting people in to discuss important things. Okay, so that was a description of what a marae and a wharenui are. Heading into today's topic now is, so you've got a few key contributing factors that set the background context for what I'd like to share today. And so the first one is the report produced by TPK that was done in 2009 that covered over 500 marae throughout the country. And that pretty much revealed that wharenui were aging, and that 70% of these buildings are over 50 years old, and 35% of them are over 100 years old. And moreover, 66% of these buildings require a major upgrade. So that's key contributing factor number one. Number two is, as shown in the figure, there are many marae located in regions of moderate to high levels of seismicity. We are, of course, living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, after all. So this photo here is one of the elders at our marae on my mother's side during the renovations some time ago. And I guess the third key factor is that wharenui may be considered a part of the older generation of existing buildings, and as such council is probably unlikely to have their plans. And so I guess, what do we do about this? With the three factors combined, number one, that they're aging and required major upgrades, and they're located in regions of medium to high levels of seismicity. Number two, plans are unlikely to be available. And number three, of course, referring back to again with the upgrades, the question is then raised about what do we do to develop some potential guidelines for these buildings in particular, because they probably will be subject to these DSAs in the future. And so I guess this guidance can come in the form of a booklet, and because wharenui typically do share similarities structurally, they are regular buildings, mostly made out of timber, an idea was formed to potentially take Section C9 and adapt it further specifically for wharenui buildings. Okay, so as a first step towards this development of these guidelines, I met with the hapu, or sub-tribes of approximately 30 marae in the Rohe, or region of Te Arawa, so in the Central Bay of Plenty. I met with the tribes around that area, so 30 of them, to kind of acquire the information about their wharenui buildings, whether it existed, and if it did, to what extent, and how could this potentially inform some baseline knowledge about, what are their gravity and lateral load resisting structures. But however, when I took a step back, what I found was that the engagement was extremely successful, as shown by these photos. And by successful, I mean that I was able to visit all 30, first of all, without refusal. Number two was, it was a very welcoming and supportive process. And number three, that the relationships that I built, they're still going and they're still strong. And secondly, what I found was that there were more plans than initially expected, which was good. But despite this, there were the details did vary depending on how long ago it was renovated or initially constructed. However, upon reflection, I realized that I had it pretty easy in terms of engagement. Number one, because I was raised in Te Ao Māori, I was quite comfortable with being on the marae. I understood all the organisational politics, etc. So I guess what I wanted to share in this presentation is that although I don't confess to know the exact technique on how to do this, I'd like to share a step-by-step process to try if you were to do this. Light bulb moment. So step one would be to visit Māori maps and search for the desired marae. So I went on here and searched up my father's one, Pounamu Nui. It came up. And within there are contact details for those who you might want to get in contact with to, let's say, acquire information or get the DSA process going. So up here you've got the chairman of the committee, or otherwise you have the generic contact for bookings and that. So step number three would be identifying the key person of the marae to deal with. And this is crucial because within this organisational chart, which was gifted to me by my father, and this is just one example, there's going to be that key person who is responsible for pretty much all of the work, or who just does all of the work in general. So this could be one of the trustees up the top, or this could be a committee member. Interestingly enough, in most cases, the trustees are the committee members. However, I think the important thing to note here is that every marae is different. And the key person might not always have a formal title, so it's important to get this step right. So let's say you've done steps 1, 2, and 3 well, and you're ready to go into the marae to conduct your DSA or have initial discussions. These were some of the lessons learned from my experience that I can share today. So number one is respecting the kawa. And so the kawa, there are customs that every marae follow. And so with every marae having its own customs or kawa, it's essential to follow their lead and adapt our behavior to align with their protocols. This demonstrates humility and respect. Number 2 is giving koha. A koha is a gift, often food, money, or something useful like our time or expertise. It's not just a gesture of our goodwill, it's recognizing the mana of the marae and their hospitality, and it helps foster work in the future. Number 3 is bringing kai. Sharing food is an important part of whanaungatanga or relationship building. Bringing kai shows that we've come prepared to contribute and share and care for those who host us. After bringing kai is all about sharing whanaungatanga. This term is about connection, taking time to share who we are and where we come from, and also learning the same from others. This mutual understanding sets the tone for the work ahead. And the last couple of points, there are quotes given by the people of the community, and that is hapu pace, meaning that we need to move at the pace of the community and not our project deadlines, and that it is all in the delivery and how we present ourselves. And so in conclusion, firstly, wharenui are living ancestors, and this is made evident in their structure. Secondly, because of their condition, location, and age, specific guidance is potentially needed. And thirdly, as part of trying to strive towards this guidance, it was found that these plans are available and vary in detail. And lastly, as a part of this process, of course, I don't confess to know the exact technique, but a step-by-step process has been laid out for everyone to follow. And so I guess apart from the valuable time of the marae committees and trustees, the content of today's presentation has also come from working with all of these guys. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa, kahuri. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. So, I feel a little bit out of my depth here. I'm a building inspector in a room full of esteemed engineers, engineer fellows. So you're going to hear probably a different perspective in terms of engineering from me today. It reminds me of a joke that went around a while ago where two engineers were trying to measure the height of a power pole, and they were using trigonometry to work that all out, and the inspector just undid the bolts and on the hinge at the base, laid it down and measured it. And then the engineer said, "You don't understand, we wanted the height, not the length." So, today, natural disasters are always part of our world. Devastation doesn't have to be. Through smart structural seismic design, we have the power to resist nature's fury. And it saves lives, it preserves communities, builds resilience that hopefully lasts for generations. Today I'm going to give you some insights into some of the recent weather events in Auckland and how some of the seismic design helped reduce the impacts, and in cases where there wasn't seismic design, how it could have helped. There's lots of photos, very little words, so bear with me. A lot to get through in 10 minutes. The engineers have the ability to influence resilience. Now, we don't have resilience in our building code, we've got durability. So it's something where it's quite silent on being able to reuse buildings as quick as possible after an event that we'd like to focus more on in the future. Speaking of logic, this is back in Christchurch days, there's still stuff that defy logic to us. And so where I say grounded in logic, shaped in reality, we still see bendy bricks out there and roofs that manage to defy gravity. So going back to February 2023, we had suffered two major events, the anniversary weekend floods followed closely by Cyclone Gabrielle. Here are a few of the aerial photographs that we took while we were doing our reconnaissance on damage assessment planning. And as we went around, we noticed there was quite a lot of damage to the cliff faces, which happened to be the most expensive real estate in Auckland, very flash houses. They pay big bucks for these views. A lot of these buildings were designed to be situated on a cliff edge, but they were designed to save the lives of the people so they could escape the building more so than being able to live in it after an event. One of the classic photos here, which I'd like to draw attention to, is the one on the bottom left. This is an example of resilient design. This is the day after, being able to build a pooled structure and use it the next day with no worries. In reality, they had no idea the danger they were in. That's probably the takeaway here. But great design, kept that pool nice and safe for them. So there's a couple of videos here just in Muriwai, we'd walked around. A lot of houses were hit by landslides out there. And, we were actually very lucky due to some of the design features that we have in terms of buffer zones and palisading ground retaining walls nowadays that have saved lives. But in a lot of situations, we saw buildings just get absolutely wiped out. And during earthquakes, one of the key knock-on effects that we do see are landslips. And are we designing seismic resistant buildings and looking at the wider picture at the same time? That's a question that I probably pose here. Again, not so relevant to Auckland because a lot of our lightweight framed houses, wind governs the design. Should we be looking at earthquake loading to a point, and particularly where there are hazards or potential hazards on the land itself? Yeah, are we looking at designing to the worst case scenario? The building on the left there, it did its job in terms of the building code. The people were allowed to safely escape, and in fact they came back, they were allowed to re-enter temporarily to remove some of their personal effects, but they weren't allowed to live in it. Now, if there was some sort of deeper pile system that was involved in the design, because of the precarious nature of sitting on a steep hill like that, that may have allowed, and in certain cases we had situations where people were allowed to go back and live in their houses after an event. Obviously you'd cordon off the backyard, but we had from building plans and designs showing that they had deep pile foundations that allowed them to stay safe. So I'm just going to quickly go through one example. This is in Opanuku Stream, Henderson Valley. This is a house that was built next to a small meandering stream, and it was blocked upstream with a lot of debris. In the house was a young couple with a newborn baby and their mother. As the water started rising and they heard debris hitting the side of the house, the husband went down and checked it out and said, "Oh, it's starting to rise, we stay upstairs." So they stayed upstairs while this happened. A artificial dam burst above them and basically came down with a lot of debris, a lot of trees and rocks, and they hit that house quite far. The velocity was quite fast. It actually took out the back wall and went through the house and out the front. Now, luckily for us, this is a pole house, and it was originally a pole house kept above the ground for that very reason of the stream being in its location. And it was closed in later. So the poles were still there, and they resisted. I mean, that smaller area of force, they resisted pretty well, the debris flowing around it, but it took out the walls. And this is a good example of inadvertent sacrificial walls. They were safe upstairs. They didn't know it at the time, but you'll see here the top plate just being pulled down as the debris pushes the bottom of the wall off the floor. The house was perfectly fine. They managed to escape after the water died down. So is that one of the possible design features that we could look at in the future in terms of sacrificial non-load bearing walls in situations where you do have that risk? Plenty of examples of that happening both in floodwaters, that's down on the east coast, and also the one on the right in Muriwai, where slips have gone through a building and the building has resisted well, and they've been able to carry on, and it happened without any lives being lost or injured. And I'm going to finish with the power pole story. It's going back to my joke I started with. They do have steel power poles with hinges and bolted base plates. This is a Mangawhai after the tornado a couple of months ago. 21 of these poles went over. They lost power for a long time. It's a simple decision to make, isn't it? You can kind of see where you've got tornado-prone areas around the country, and maybe that's something that we've got to learn from. And finally, the shot tower, Heritage Tower on the right there, is unfortunately had to be condemned during Gabriel. We had a lot of structural issues with that previously identified. It was on our list of high-risk buildings, and when we saw that Gabriel was bearing down on Auckland, we had to evacuate those apartment dwellers around it. So 26 of those apartments, people had to be loaded onto buses. Some of them ended up at the Trust Stadium. Others found their own way, but it wasn't very nice to be able to evacuate people. Is there something that we could have done at a design stage when you're looking at those apartments, whether there is a possibility, knowing that that structure is old, early 1900s, 1920s, I think, 35 metres high, and possibly still got its brick kiln in the top there. So clearly some risks there that we could learn from. That's pretty much all I've got to say, but one of the things is, just from our learnings, seeing things in real life and from the structural design right through to how it behaves in a disaster situation or a high weather event. It's crucial to take some of those learnings and take it back into your original design concept. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Julia from the Joint Centre of Disaster Research at Massey University, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit from a social science research perspective about putting people at the heart of engineering and trying to understand why people might adopt or ignore engineering solutions. So I'm going to sort of refer to earthquake preparedness in general, I think, and I'm going to be looking at it really from a homeowner's perspective, because that's a lot of where I do some of my research with my colleagues. And when we think about preparedness, we can think about it in lots of different ways. So it could be this kind of idea of survival preparedness, having your food and your water at home. It can be structural preparedness, whether it's looking at the structure of your home or the non-structural elements of your home. And also aspects like community preparedness, where you might want to make a response plan, a community response plan with other people in your community. And also psychological preparedness is a big part of preparedness as well. So if you understand what the effects of an earthquake might be and you've done something to prepare for it, then you're more psychologically ready for what might happen if an earthquake were to occur. So from a social science, psychology perspective, there are lots of ways that preparedness might be influenced. And I'll refer back to my colleague Lauren Vanell, who's in the room as well. If you were at the Earthquake Engineering Conference a couple of years ago in Auckland, we did a session on risk communication, and so we talked a little bit about some of these things in that session, so you can kind of refer back to that as well, or some of the previous presentations that we've been involved with. But here's one diagram from some Canterbury research where we demonstrate some of the things that preparedness might be influenced from a personal perspective. So if you're a person and you're a homeowner and you're thinking about either retrofitting or upgrading your home, these are some of the things that might influence whether you decide to do that or not. So these might be beliefs, so whether you believe an earthquake is going to occur or how imminent that earthquake might be, or some of your beliefs about preparing, so whether you think preparing is useful or not. And that links into some of these risk perception or threat perception beliefs, which can be quite important. If you don't think the earthquakes are a big risk, you might not be that motivated to prepare. If you think they're an extremely big risk and there might be lots and lots of damage, you might be less likely to prepare because you're a bit scared about it or fatalistic about it. Other influences include critical awareness, which is kind of how often you think or talk about some of these issues, about earthquake issues and about preparing. The more often you do that, the more likely you might be to prepare. And one of those beliefs, one of those important sets of beliefs relate to outcome expectancy as well. So that's the expectation that if you prepare, then the outcome after an earthquake will be better. You might survive, you might have less damage to your house. So if you believe that preparing will help you in an earthquake, you're more likely to prepare as well. Aspects around community participation are really important. So if you're kind of active in your community, you talk to other community members about these issues and you make plans about how to deal with them, we know that that's a good way of promoting preparedness. And there's also lots of other things that I haven't put on that diagram. Access to information. If you don't know about how to prepare or what to do to prepare, that's going to obviously be a barrier on you preparing. your understanding of some of that information, and things that we see pop up like cost, how much time you have, the influence of regulations on whether you'll do something or not, and aspects around trust. So not a comprehensive list by any means, but there's all sorts of things to think about preparedness and what might influence homeowners in particular, but also other people as well. So I'm going to talk about a case study just in relation to the Canterbury earthquake sequence. Now I know 90% of you, 95% of you will be familiar with this, but there's always new people in the room, so just a few details about that. As you get older, you have the luxury of knowing a bit more about these events, but some newer people might not. So this was initiated on the 4th of September 2010, and there was a very large aftershock in Christchurch on the 22nd of February 2011, which caused a lot of death, injury, and damage and destruction. And this sequence was quite prolonged for people, for homeowners living in the area, for people, for businesses, as it went on for a couple of years with lots of aftershocks affecting people all of the time. And some of these contextual pieces of information are quite important to thinking about how people might respond in terms of preparedness. So this is why I'm kind of introducing them at this stage. So a few more details about the earthquake. I really want to focus on, because we're talking about homeowners, I want to talk about the impact that it might have had on those types of people. So there was nearly 75% of housing that was damaged, so whether you owned your home or whether you rented, which caused quite a bit of disruption to the community. So obviously there was a red zone, a number of houses had to be demolished. People were moving around to try and move out of houses that had been that were uninhabitable, and there was definitely a lot of damage and disruption to regular activities across the following years. There was also a lot of recovery challenges, as I mentioned before. So we had red zoned areas of housing and in the central business district, ongoing demolitions and issues around insurance. So these times were pretty disruptive for people during the earthquake sequence and after that as well. So I'm going to talk about why people might or might not prepare in the context of these earthquakes, and a couple of studies that we'd done over several years. So we had done some survey work in Canterbury before the earthquakes about earthquake preparedness in 2009, and we repeated that survey in 2013 and 2021. And so we were really looking to see what were the influences on preparedness during this time, so before, during the disruption of the earthquakes and afterwards as well. And this particular study was a combined effort with myself, Lauren, Emma Hudson-Doyle, Sarah McBride from the USGS, and also our dearly beloved late David Johnston and late Douglas Payton as well. So we know that from the people who answered the 2021 survey that most had experienced the February 2011 earthquake, and we'd also had the Kaikoura earthquake occur not long afterwards as well, so that had an impact on kind of how people thought about earthquakes and what they did for them. And if you're trying to promote preparedness or ask people to get prepared, you often need information for them, and so we also collated a bit of information about this information before, during, and after the Canterbury earthquake sequence. So there was quite a lot of information about earthquakes and the nature of earthquakes and kind of what they did from more of a science perspective beforehand, and a bit of preparedness information. And then afterwards we sort of see a bit more detail, I guess, about how to prepare, particularly on structural and non-structural elements as well. So it's kind of evolved over time and got more detailed over time. So let's get to these factors that I was talking about earlier. So critical awareness, this is the degree to which people think and talk about earthquakes, and we know that it's important for kind of the process of thinking about what they might need to do and to find solutions for earthquakes. And so we see probably quite obviously that there wasn't so much thinking and talking about earthquakes in 2009 before the sequence, but it rose dramatically throughout the sequence itself and has dropped off a bit towards 2021. Probably a lot of what was being discussed during the earthquakes themselves more related to what was happening in the earthquakes and the types of experiences people were having rather than preparedness itself. Yeah, we can see the impact an event has on people thinking and talking about events. I remember talking to some of the emergency managers, and they said it was quite hard immediately after the February earthquake to get a really good conversation about preparedness, because people were quite focused on really immediate aspects like things like welfare and where they were going to live and those types of things. But there is definitely a function for I guess talking about preparedness after an event. So if you've got a sort of a smaller or a moderate earthquake, you'll often see Natural Hazards Commission, for example, putting out ads immediately after those events to try and get people thinking about experiencing an event. It gets people thinking and talking, and then trying to direct people into getting more prepared. So that's definitely something to think about, sort of the timing of that thinking and talking, and what you can do, how you can adjust your information to get people more prepared after a smaller event at least. Just on earthquake beliefs and threat perceptions, we saw an increase over time in beliefs that a bad earthquake could occur, but it's easy to prepare. And then a modest increase in threat perceptions, which was maintained 10 years on. And you can see, if you look at the property bar, you can see that had gone up over time from 2009 to 2021, so gone up and sort of been sustained. So overall, we had some very high perceptions of earthquake threat. In terms of outcome expectancy, or the belief that doing something is going to help you in an event itself, we saw that, if you look at that second bar chart we saw that an increase in belief that preparing will help improve everyday living conditions. So it's probably related to things like if you didn't have any water following the earthquakes and you'd stored water, that was going to help you get through after an earthquake. But we did see a very interesting decrease in belief that preparing for earthquakes will reduce home damage. And that was quite interesting and something to kind of think about as we kind of move through the slides. In terms of overall preparedness, we often say that the easiest things to prepare for are things like getting your food and your water ready, getting your emergency supplies and your essential medicines. We saw that this was also the case throughout the sequence, the Canterbury earthquake sequence, that some of the easier things to do were more often done by people. And you can see they increased over time as the earthquakes sequence was kind of at its height. And then they've dropped off a little bit, but preparedness is still generally higher than it was before the actual initiation of the sequence. We saw some increases in this idea that people were willing to pass on more information to other community members, so they're more likely to kind of have that conversation with other community members about earthquake preparedness. And they're also thinking more about the role of agencies in preparedness. So what's my role personally? What does the council do? What are some of the other roles that other agencies might do in helping me undertake preparedness? However, the places where we didn't see much change, or perhaps sometimes we saw some decreases, were in some community aspects, so things like participation and empowerment. There was no real change across time. And there was no change, or maybe even up to a 10% decrease in some of the retrofitting of non-structural elements, and low levels of structural retrofitting in 2021. But intentions to do so. So not much had been done, but they were thinking about it. So some of this data can kind of help us understand where we need to give information or support to homeowners in helping them get prepared. So, in conclusion, we've got to the last slide. So I guess I just wanted to re-emphasize that understanding what drives people to adopt or perhaps ignore engineering solutions is really helpful in helping us understand how to inform some of these interventions. So what kind of information should we be giving people how often, who should be giving it, who should we be working with to try and support people to get prepared. So we saw many positive changes. So the preparedness had lifted over the 10-year time frame and has remained slightly elevated. And there are still strong perceptions of earthquake threat, but we do see some of these gaps in preparedness, particularly around non-structural and structural retrofitting. So there is a question to why this outcome expectancy, so this belief in that preparing in terms of structural preparedness people think it might not make a difference. We don't really know why, so we need to ask a few more questions, but I guess one of the reasons could be that during the earthquake sequence itself, they saw that there was quite a lot of damage to property, and so maybe they feel that some of these retrofitting actions or these changes might not make a difference in a future earthquake. So we might need to put in a little bit more effort encouraging some of the structural preparedness or promoting some of those benefits of structural preparedness so that people do actually take that step and get prepared. And I think also maybe clarifying some roles around who needs to prepare, some of those responsibilities, and linking into those community relationships. So if people are willing to share information, let's work with that and try and get people to share information more widely amongst themselves in terms of getting prepared. So that's it from me, so thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou. So I'm going to build on Julia's presentation. She's been talking mainly about homeowners, and I'm going to really focus on organisations and how they make decisions about how they retrofit how they decide what standard and how to retrofit their buildings. So organisations are all different. You know, the nature of their operations, their staff, their clients and the community they serve, they all impact the risk that they can or should take. So this means that, as Laurie said this morning, one size does not fit all. And so we need to think about how we cater for these different needs when we're designing new buildings, we're retrofitting existing buildings, or we're communicating risk. So this presentation really weaves together a few different research projects and guidance documents that are helping to bridge the gap between engineering outcomes and organisational and societal needs. And I don't really focus on the process of the engineering of the research projects, but focus on the outcomes of those. So I'm going to focus on what we know organisations may need to cope with disruption. So this is really sort of looking at a community recovery perspective and how we know that different organisations face the effects of an earthquake. And thinking about how that might impact the potential level of life safety protection, disruption protection or damage protection that they might wish to mitigate. So to help illustrate this point, I'd like you to meet my building owner avatars. These characters are going to help me demonstrate some of the points that I'm going to make around the functional and organisational perspective that can shape the conversations we're having with building owners and the choices that they might make. So life safety. So everyone likes and wants life safety. But it can be perceived as on or off, as Henry mentioned yesterday. So is it safe or is it not? And what complicates that is this incremental increases in life safety protection are really difficult to measure the benefits of. It's much easier for us to measure the benefits of tangible aspects, like damage. How much will it cost to fix? Or disruption, how much downtime will there be? From a societal perspective, there may be a case and a desire for higher life safety protections in certain types of buildings, particularly where vulnerable people are residing or where organisations are potentially trading on a safety brand. So if I ask our avatars up to the stage here, we'll see that Andy from AAA Aged Care might be on the right-hand side of this drawing and ideally looking for a higher life safety protection because of the nature of the occupants of the building. Whereas we see Eddie from ELEC EDB, the electricity distribution company, he's probably not too worried about life safety because his buildings, the buildings he manages, there's technicians in them for an hour a day at most, and there's not a lot of life safety risk or exposure there. Thinking about disruption to function. Thinking about disruption to function, based on experience of recent events, like the Canterbury earthquakes, but even looking at events like COVID and our dependence on different buildings and being in a physical space there, we know that some organisations are more dependent on their building for their ongoing operations. So particularly those that can't easily relocate or work remotely. And for some buildings, it's more important based on a physical or emotional need to support the community in the aftermath of an earthquake. So if we see here, we've got Te Rūnganga Marae and our aged care facilities both play a significant role in supporting their communities. But you'll also see Eddie from EDB has jumped over from the left-hand side of the diagram to the right-hand side of the diagram because continued functionality is really what is driving the needs and performance of his building due to his role as a lifeline utility under the CDM Act. So this has a nice resonance with the presentation yesterday from the Seismic Risk Working Group and John here presenting the potential new approach to importance levels. So separating out these life safety needs from these functionality needs and allowing more flexibility based on the needs of the organisations. So great to see some resonance there. Damage control is a little bit different to functionality and life safety in that it really goes down to the appetite and capacity of a building owner and tenants to access insurance and finance for repair work. There might be some other considerations too though. So you might want better damage control where you have a building with significant cultural significance or building fabric, or perhaps you've got content within the building which is difficult to replace. So in our example with our avatars here, we've got Te Rūnganga Marae on the right-hand side, maybe thinking about the potential loss of cultural fabric within their building and linking to Sonny's presentation earlier. And we've also got Eddie from EDB, and maybe they should be worried about the damage to some of the critical plant that may be either expensive, timely, or difficult to replace. So far I've been really responding to what we've seen from community recovery and what these different organisations and the different functions that these different organisations perform in the community and how we need to support those. But we've got work at the moment looking at the other side. So what are the drivers and barriers to action from organisations? And somewhere how we need to meet in the middle. We need to be helping organisations to understand what they are doing and how they're supporting community recovery after an event, but we also need to be cognizant of those very real drivers and barriers for action. So more coming here, watch this space. Now, risk communication. So just as organisational context plays a really important role in the decisions that owners should be making around the actions that they take, organisational context is a really important thing to think about when we're determining how to communicate risk with organisations so that they best understand and can motivate appropriate action. So when you're working with clients and before presenting risk information, it's really helpful to embrace the context of the organisation that you're working with. So really understand the other risks that they're managing day to day and how can seismic risk be placed alongside those other risks. Is there certain language that organisations are using to describe risk in terms of the consequences or likelihood? You know, when we talk about the likelihood of a hazard or a hazard disrupting a building, is that the same likelihood terminology that they're using within their internal risk management systems? And is it an organisation that's driven by avoiding losses, or are they driven by gaining benefits? So that might influence whether you positively frame things or negatively frame things, so it resonates most with that organisation. And once you understand that context, you can frame your information in a relevant and meaningful way. So one easy way to tailor risk messaging is to think about the time horizon that organisations are working on. Is it a tenant looking for the potential risks that they might face during the duration of their lease, so Sam from small goods retail, or are they looking at potentially asset planning time frames, like Sally, Andy and Eddie in the middle there? Or are they looking at intergenerational well-being, which might be top of mind for the marae? So thinking about the time frame within your describing probabilities is really influenced by these contexts, and one size definitely doesn't fit all. So every client and building owner is different. And of course, this presentation is a gross oversimplification of the complicated nature of organisations and the complex drivers. But really, it was just a way to illustrate the importance of understanding the context and tailoring the way that we're helping organisations determine how to build their buildings, but also how to communicate the risk. Look, we live in a world of constrained resources, and yes, we all want buildings to perform as the best they can, but this really has to be tempered against the realities that individuals and organisations reside in. And there are many other priorities facing these organisations. So it's really our job to paint the picture of how earthquakes might affect them, and which risks they might like to consider, and to communicate in a language that people can best put the earthquake risk into their own organisational context. So the resources that we've got up here are some of the ones that have been developed recently. So there's a guide for commercial tenants to help them understand what sort of level of performance they should be looking for in buildings when they're looking to lease. There's the newly released client guide for low damage seismic design, so which helps organisations understand whether or not they should be looking towards low damage design, and then the basics of what low damage design is. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a little advice. It's about a 5-page document, which is to support engineers in their work communicating with building owners. It's currently tailored towards communicating with commercial tenants, but there's a lot in there that would be useful just with building owners as well. So these resources really embed the thinking that I've sort of described today. They provide questions, checklists, and examples to help support conversations with clients around the desired performance outcomes, as well as suggestions for how to communicate different types of seismic risk information. So for those who have already started to read some of these and use some of these documents, love to hear your feedback in terms of what's working well, what's not working well, and where there could be improvements in the future. So thanks very much for your time.
Any questions from the floor? We just have a few minutes, so ask now, or you can ask them later. We have a few questions as well in the through the app. I don't think they're up yet, but yeah, one from for Sonny. Assessment can lead to retrofit. Any thoughts on Mariah specific strengthening requirements?
Hello, hello. Cool.
Yeah, assessment can lead to retrofit. Any thoughts on Mariah-specific strengthening requirements? The second one.
Yep. So through discussions with some firms back in my hometown, they've done quite a lot of work on Wharenui buildings in particular. And one strength of Wharenui is that they're quite regular buildings. So the assessment process is quite simple, but I think in the longitudinal direction, they're fine, but it's the transverse direction because there's not much wall there relative to how much there is on this side. And so, for example, you could probably, in terms of requirements, maybe even skip the process and ask the marae committee or whānau if they're looking to establish a room that neighbours it to give it that transverse reinforcement. Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to answer this question from Ken. Risk tolerance changes with time, fluctuating with when earthquakes happens. But when setting policy or standards, we need stability in the risk we target or accept. How to address this conflict? Who wants to take it?
I feel like the microphone was closer to Charlotte. I feel like she could have answered this one. I don't think there's an answer for this one. I think there is some acceptance of the fact that there is always going to be variation in risk tolerance depending on the context, who you are, what's happened. All of these things make it really tricky. Yeah, it's probably a combination of understanding kind of what some of those tolerances are, maybe combined with expertise from professionals who also have a good understanding of what might be able to happen. That would kind of be my take on it from a very vague social science kind of context, but I'm going to pass it to Charlotte.
Yeah, Ken, you ask the difficult questions, don't you? Yeah, it is. So whenever you're thinking about risk tolerance, you've got to be conscious that it's in a space and time, and it is influenced by all these things that are happening around, current regulations, past events, etc., etc. So I think the first thing is raising awareness of that. So let's not design our standards for today. Let's think about how they might change in the future. And so understanding some of those drivers of what might change people's perceptions and projecting what that might look like into the future. And also allowing for adaptability where we can, I think, is really important as well. So, and I think that connection between, understanding what maybe societal expectations are alongside that expert elicitation, expert assessment of how that might change through time is super important. Yeah, but no, there's no answer at the moment.
Sorry.
Question for Julia. I cannot remember the actual origin of this, but in Australia we had a competing values discussion around bushfire protection. And would you rather have a new kitchen, which benefits you in business as usual, or would you prefer to have bushfire protections that could cost the same amount but are only beneficial under certain conditions of disruption? And yeah, majority of people went with a new kitchen. So I'm wondering if earthquake retrofit might be something where you're asking all these questions, but it's a competing values thing of what people see as a benefit in the long term and every day without disruption, and that earthquake, I know I need to do it, but I just don't have the other time because I've got so many other competing values. I'm wondering if that's something you've researched.
Yeah, I mean, it comes across in a lot of the work that we do, I guess, and probably more in the qualitative work. But I mean, obviously you do have competing priorities, right? I mean, I'd probably want a new kitchen as well. In fact, I did get a new kitchen and I forgot to look at the structural integrity of my house as well at the same time, which would have been a perfect opportunity to actually do that at the same time while I had a builder in there. But anyway, so we're all as bad as each other, really. Yeah, so, I mean, there are always going to be kind of really motivated people. You're going to get that 25 to 50% who will do something for various reasons. There'll be plenty who don't. So I think probably one of the things to think about is how can we take more community approaches to some of these things instead of just always relying on individuals who might not be able to afford it or might not understand how to do it. So thinking more broadly around, I guess, just the responsibility of the individual homeowner, but maybe there's a collective societal responsibility that might support that more. So.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question around who bears the risk and who pays for it. So, and it's the difference between that individual risk versus that collective risk. And I think we don't have really good, mature conversations about this at the moment. We sort of expect individuals or businesses to make these decisions, but then we don't think about the public consequences of those. So, yeah, I think that needs to be part of our conversation as well.
Cool. I'll just two more questions because we started a bit late. Jeff, for you, breakaway walls at the ground floor seem like a good idea for landslides, tsunamis, and flooding. Is there any appetite with the Auckland Council to support this design approach?
Thanks, Jenny. Great question. If you would have asked me 5 or 6 years ago, would Auckland Council support 10-storey CLT buildings or any other innovation that we're seeing all the time come through? I think, yes, absolutely. It's all alternative solution at the moment, but it may be an acceptable solution in the future. I'm sure they're doing this worldwide. We just need to have the details that go back to the high-level objectives of the building code. So is it going to make it safer or healthier or more sustainable in the long term? That's the key question, and you've got to relate that evidence back to that somehow. So, yeah, the answer is yes, although breakaway walls could be probably more damaging in some situations to people living in the building. possibly top hinged walls. I don't know. Thanks.
Maybe you also want to contribute to answer the last question that we have about multi-hazard. Do you think we are prepared in terms of disaster response when it comes to multi-hazard, and what do you think we can do from a policy perspective?
I think my personal answer is we're getting a lot better in our preparedness, but when we're looking at this now, we've got a lot more to go in terms of data, and knowing our systems that we have at the moment. I can see room for improvement, but it is heading in the right track. We've got teams of experts now working on that constantly, and MB and working groups that are really making this a priority for future events.
Oh, this question was meant to be for Julie and Charlotte, but, you know. Yeah, no, it's good. Do you want to add something, Julia or Charlotte?
I'll chip in. Yeah, I guess I'd probably say no is the answer to that question. We're not necessarily well prepared for a single event. I mean, I guess when you look at the preparedness data, it's really only, like I say, between 25 and 50%, depending on what kind of stats you go on. So yeah, we could definitely be more prepared from a personal kind of homeowner perspective, and I guess as well as, you know, a more organisational and government perspective as well. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say to that. Yeah, no further comments from Charlotte.
Well, thank you. Help me to thank our amazing speakers.